insisting it will not abandon its nuclear ambitions and will continue to prepare for what it calls preemptive attacks with nuclear force. This comes amid efforts that Russia and China are supplying the rogue regime with oil in violation of UN sanctions.
That's according to two senior Western European security sources who tell Reuters that Russian vessels made ship-to-ship fuel transfers at sea with North Korean vessels in breach of UN sanctions. That tankers from Russia have supplied fuel to North Korea on at least 3 occasions in recent months, providing an economic lifeline to the Hermit Kingdom.
Really the next step is additional what we call secondary sanctions, which are sanctions not against the North Koreans, but against the Chinese entities, the banks, the oil and gas, the food stuff, the shipping industry that are continuing to do business behind the scenes with North Korea. We sanction them, and we bring our European allies, the Australians, East Asians, others on board to basically start having the Chinese feel the pain here.
So what you're saying is there's not a whole lot we can do about enforcement of sanctions. If they're going to cheat on those sanctions, they're going to. Eventually, we need to make it hurt for them. How close are we to, because we've heard about these Chinese banks and how significant they are to the state there. How far are we in sanctioning them?
Well, we made some initial steps for a number of banks and a number of individuals, but those sanctions, the problem here, Pete, is time. Those sanctions take time to actually have an effect. We need, from a diplomatic standpoint, to get others on board, Europeans and other Asian countries, to have an effect. At the same time, though, we're on the clock. The North Koreans only need to get an ICBM capable of re-entry now. They have the range. Now it's a re-entry problem, and they're there. They're across the finish line.
The report comes after China on Friday denied it had illegally shipped oil products to North Korea, responding to a tweet from President Trump in which he said China had been caught red-handed selling oil to the DPRK. Reuters was unable to independently verify the fuel transfers between Russia and North Korea, or whether the Russian state knew about the sales of oil. North Korea relies on imported fuel to keep its struggling economy functioning. It also requires oil for its intercontinental ballistic missile and nuclear programs. The UN Security Council unanimously adopted new sanctions against North Korea this month, following a November missile test experts said was Pyongyang's most advanced yet.
To counter anything that the United States can do to stop it, what do we do?
A couple of things we can do. One is we have to remain very vigilant. This could go into a really crazy situation very rapidly. We already saw earlier the craziness with Guam, you'll recall that, and tensions were really tense. Nothing really has changed except for North Korea has honed in, more of their work on the intercontinental ballistic missiles and perfecting it and trying to work out the warhead to put into those missiles.
Now, see, Jonathan, when you tell me that, my instant thought goes to not to Kim Jong-un, because we know he's crazy. I hate to say that, but pretty much, and that's a terrible thing to say, but the world usually views him as being crazy. But then there's Russia and there's China not doing what they need to do in terms of their due diligence to make sure that North Korea is contained and that it doesn't get too squirrely on us to the point that we can't pull it back and keep something from happening in terms of provocation to an all-out war, which would be disastrous, of course. So what do we do to Russia and China?
One thing, you just mentioned an all-out war. Russia and China really don't want that to happen. That would be.
But if they keep pushing the envelope.
That understood, but they really don't want that to happen. That is why we've seen some coming around in terms of Beijing and Moscow, because they don't like to have a super heavily armed atomic power in North Korea right next to them. I mean, yes, they have a history of supporting North Korea militarily, economically, They're neighboring countries. They have trade historically right across those borders, hundreds of miles of shared borders. It makes sense for them to be engaged with North Korea. But they don't want a conflict, because if you have a conflict, then you have unforeseen consequences that will affect them.
So do they want to give the United States and its Western allies a headache?
They certainly are enjoying giving us a headache, no question in that regard, and they've enjoyed that for decades. It's been quite helpful for them to have the United States be a boogeyman in North Korea, and to have this adjutant, irritant for the United States. It's a costly irritant as well. We have troops stationed in the demilitarized zone in Korea, and we have to remain vigilant because it really is an unpredictable regime in North Korea, and it's scary because they are a nuclear power.
So what does Russia and China gain by making sure that North Korea remains a headache to us and a distraction to us in terms of moving forward with things that we want to do globally?
Geopolitically, it's helpful for them because they have yet another tool in their box to be able to pressure the United States and put us at unease. There's a level of irresponsibility here, obviously. We wouldn't have this problem, one could easily argue, if Moscow and Beijing really clamped down and didn't do as that report you reported a short time ago, providing fuel and other lifelines to the North Korean regime. So they want this to be going on. The other thing that they gain from this is obviously trying to contain geopolitical strength in the region itself.
Yeah.
South Korea is economically strong. It's a competitor. Japan is economically strong. There are territorial disputes between Russia and Japan. China has issues historically with Japan. So there are various
So it
things
sounds like a
going
chess
on
game
here.
going on, but historically, Kim Jong-un is looking at the likes of some other people like Saddam Hussein, you were mentioning, Muammar Gaddafi, trying to follow the pattern that they had in terms of being belligerent and provocative in their actions. Wise move or an unwise move?
Well, look at those two people that you just mentioned, two dictators who managed to keep power through being boogeymen and strong and military might and threatening the world with this and that. And they didn't have nuclear deterrence. Both of those dictators are dead. And Kim Jong-un knows that if war breaks out, he is probably one of the first casualties. So having a nuclear deterrent is something that he understands in his calculus, trying to survive, trying to allow all his guys surrounding him and women surrounding him, the government there, to survive. They have their own cottage industry going on in North Korea. Survival is at the center of it.
Yeah, well,
North Korea's nuclear and missile program is a long-running story. But this year, for the first time, they tested intercontinental ballistic missiles that experts say can hit most of the United States, if not all. That is something that North Korea has said they will achieve for a long time, but it was seen as a very long shot, and experts until last year said that North Korea was years and years away from having that capability. But perhaps more importantly, what happened this year is that we have Donald Trump newly in the picture. You could say that Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un are two of the world's most unpredictable leaders. And here you have a combination of these two running and dictating the world's most urgent security issue. The consequences of any war on the Korean Peninsula were considered too huge, and war was considered unthinkable. And many people still thought that Trump possibly was bluffing, but we still were forced to think about the very real prospect of war for the first time in a very long time. One of the biggest challenges of reporting on North Korea is you have no to little access to the country. This year was exceptionally difficult because Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, they were issuing daily threats of confrontation. So our bureau were all struggling to come up with answers and try to figure out what was truly going on behind the scenes. Next year, I think we may well have an inflection point in the nuclear standoff. North Korea is so close to mastering its ICBM capability, and it may have a weapon next year that is able to strike in all of the United States. And Trump vowed to never make it happen. So what's the ultimate showdown likely to be? Did Trump mean what he really said about military action? Or was it more of a ploy to get North Koreans back to the negotiating room? We will find out as soon as next year And in the meantime, as a journalist, we have to be extremely careful and patient to try to report the real story behind the story.